Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be providing my book review of the self-published book All Hail the Carrion King by Thomas Godfrey. I would like to start out this review by first saying that Thomas Godfrey reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in reviewing his book. And I am generally pretty open to reading other people's books. I can't always promise that I will, but I always try to read as much as I can if someone reaches out to me. And so he sent me this copy so that I could read it and provide a review. I am in no way obligated to say anything one way or the other. But what I will say is thank you very much, Mr. Godfrey, for sending me this copy. I'm very thankful for it. And I will provide my review here. When I read this book, the first thing that came to mind was a meme from The West Wing where I thought, well, surely this is one of the strangest, weirdest books I've ever read. And friends, that's saying something. As you can tell from the title and from the cover art, which, by the way, whew, this is visceral cover art. Man, this'll catch your attention. This is a dark horror fantasy novel. It is very dark, very gruesome, very gross fantasy stuff happening. Yet it's got some very much epic fantasy tropes that you would expect to see in some traditional fantasy books, and I'll get into those in a second. So this book kind of straddles the two worlds of horror and fantasy. I am a fantasy reader, so the fantastical tropes really were what spoke to me as a reader, and I didn't particularly care for the horror. I've read horror books before, but I just don't care for them as much. That's not my genre. So if I ever, in my review here, am really negative on anything in the book, and I'm going to say I gave this a positive review. I gave this a 7 out of 10. A solid book, especially for a debut book. This is a very solid book. So I'm very positive on this book, but I have a lot of criticisms and a lot of things I didn't like about the book. But a lot of that stems from what I prefer as a reader, which is in some ways antithetical to some of the directions the author was going. So I still, if you're a horror fan or a dark fantasy fan, I think you might enjoy this book. But just be forewarned, just because I didn't like something doesn't mean you will not like it. But anyway, back to the tropes. It has the epic quest tropes that an epic fantasy novel might have, balances it with a lot of the horrific tropes that you might see and jump scares and stuff that you might see in a horror novel, and some of the sexual references you might see in a horror novel too. The epic fantasy is basic, or well, the premise of this book is there is this jester who is he's washed ashore, and he has this task that he needs to find someone who will be able to stand up against the Carrion King, and he picks the main character. The main character's name is Isaac Veritas, and he is contacted by the jester who washes ashore, and the jester wants him to be the person to confront the Carrion King. Isaac is basically kind of a jester in and of himself, and the Carrion King is the person who has basically taken over dominion of the West, of really the world, and there's no one who will stand against him. The jester kind of does, but but nobody else really does. So the main character is sent against him. And the main character in this is, even though he's like kind of a jester in training, he's essentially a like your typical farm boy. Essentially, he's from a small town called Brookshire. You think Star Wars has certain tropes like the farm boy who's contacted by the old wise character who's been around for a while, and the old wise character has a history of conflict with the evil villain, and they must go to the place of the evil villain to confront them, and things happen. Very much a Star Wars epic fantasy trope. Like, this is in Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, this is in Shannara, this is in epic fantasy as you see. And so that side of the story I found really intriguing, really interesting. And the character is a lot more open to this than most literary characters. Most literary characters, they're really reluctant and they need a lot of convincing to go along. Isaac Veritas is just like, nope, I'm just gonna go along with it, and he's ready. He just goes, and a lot of the book is the journey to get to the Carrion King, and they encounter several creatures and characters who are definitely representations of other creatures and characters from epic fantasy and from mythology, which I found really interesting. You know, as I was going along, I was trying to figure out, do I know what he's trying to reference here? And that was probably the most fun part of the book, was trying to understand what the references were going to be. And they were quite fun, some of them. This is a short read. It is about 73,000 words. In this trade paperback format, it's just shy of about 180 pages. But this is a really, really, really small print, small font size, small spacing book. One of the most smallest spacing books I've ever read. So under normal circumstances, this book might be in like a mass market paperback or even a traditional trade paperback. It might be 250, maybe even 300 pages. But here it's only about 180 because of the shrunk font size. So it's a little shorter than most novels, but it's still a pretty standard length for a novel. It's still pretty close. About if you've read any of the Star Trek books from the 90s, typically it's about the length of a Star Trek book from the 90s, and it has lots of great twists and turns. There are some there's a great twist at one point in the book that made me go, ooh, that's cool, and another twist that made me go, oh, that's gross. So there were some cool twists, and this is a funny book. There are several moments throughout where I found myself laughing, particularly in a scene where the main character is having to be a jester in a court, and he's trying to be controversial on purpose. And his controversy, oh, it's hilarious. And the scene that he creates there is just perfect. It's just funny. So I did enjoy that. I will also say that there are some themes in this book that I thought were really interesting and well done. There are some subtle themes that I really enjoyed, and then there are some overt themes that I didn't. And I can't talk about the overt themes that I didn't enjoy because I'm getting into spoilers of the book. But the subtle themes that I did like, I'll get into. And the author presents the jesters, the main characters, as essentially what we would consider to be a comedian, and presents them as those in society whose job it is to ruffle people's feathers. The jesters in this go to the faces of the people they're making fun of and make fun of them to their faces. And the people like it. The people, they're telling offensive jokes, but it is okay because that is what their job is. And it seems to be a commentary about how comedians are meant to be irreverent. They are meant to be providing commentary on, not just comedians, but artists in general are meant to provide a commentary on life. And therefore, even if you find it offensive, even if you find it problematic, even if it's directed at you, it should be allowed to happen. You shouldn't bristle too hard, because that is the purpose of art, the purpose of comedy, the purpose of the jester. So I thought that theme really was strong in here. There was an overtone of rebelliousness that I did not necessarily like in the book. Rebelliousness can work in some media. You take something like Star Wars, where it is a rebellion against a tyrannical form of government. And that is certainly an element of this. But when it's just a rebelliousness against authority, against just the norms of society, because you don't like the norms of society, that's when it's a little bit trickier, and this book kind of straddled both of those, and so that's why that was a theme I didn't prefer as much. The world building in this book is pretty bizarre. You have everything from Grey Ones, fallen angels, jesters, angels, and of course the Carrion King, who is pretty gross. And yeah, let's not go too far into the Carrion King. Nevertheless, it was fascinating to read about all of those creatures. I will say I was a little confused. I didn't know whether this was supposed to be Earth or whether it was supposed to be a brand new world, whatever universe that he's talking about. It could go either way because it's perfectly ambiguous to the point that like you could tell me it's Earth and I'd believe you, or you could say no, it's an original world. I would totally believe you. Either way, it is that ambiguous in the book. So I'm interested to see if you've read the book or if you will read the book, which one you think it is. There were several nods and references that I liked in the book to The Wizard of Oz, Lord of the Rings, and Star Wars. And I really enjoyed them. And they made me chuckle, so I appreciated those references. I do have a few comments on the book's formatting. I think that it should have been a larger print, larger font size, and larger spacing, and that instead it should have been a longer book. I think that this type of a book, the formatting of having such a thin, tall book, is, I think, less appealing to the general reader. At least that's been my opinion. If you have it more like a traditional paperback length, something like, like a mass market like this, or even, a trade paperback like this that's a little bit longer, it'd be a little bit more appealing. But as it stands, this is, a very decent sized book that appears to be much shorter. And because of how small the font size is, it kind of will, I think, deter some readers. But I think that the cover was brilliantly done. I think that the production value on other aspects of the book, like the About the Author page, is one of the best designs for an About the Author page I've seen on an indie book. The copyright page was very well done, and it includes a little bonus short story, I guess you could call it. It's basically the origins of where this idea for this book came from. And so I am very impressed overall with the production of this book and with the story itself. That really is all of my thoughts on the book. I am very, very pleased with it, although it's just not for me. I won't say, I probably won't read this again, and this isn't pulling me further into the genre of dark horror fantasy. Like, I don't want to read more after reading this book, which might just be which I think it is, that I just don't care about dark horror fantasy. It's just not a subgenre that I'm like super ready to get into. I'll keep with my epic fantasies overall, but still well written, and I hope more people who are into this type of genre do give this more of a chance and more of an opportunity, because I think this is good to help self-published authors, and for a debut book, this is really impressive. For a debut self-published book, even more impressive. So I'm very impressed with this. I give it a 7 out of 10. So if you've read this book, what are your thoughts on it? And if you're interested in reading this book, when do you think you'll get around to reading it? And if you've read other dark horror fantasy, what would you recommend? Leave your comments down below. And please subscribe to the channel for more book reviews of all types of genres. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.